There are some cases that refuse to fade into the quiet corners of history, stories so baffling, so unsettling. They cling to the public imagination like shadows that won't dissolve. Across America, countless investigations have stalled, evidence has gone cold, and leads have vanished into thin air, leaving behind mysteries that defy logic and haunt the communities they touched. These aren't just unsolved crimes, they're enigmas wrapped in riddles, puzzles that challenge everything we think we know about justice, human nature, and the limits of investigation. And today, we're diving deep into 32 of the strangest, most chilling cold cases in American history, tales that continue to send shivers down spines and keep detectives awake at night. Picture this, a small town where everyone knows everyone until one day, a person vanishes without a trace. No struggle, no note, no logical explanation, just an empty space where a life once was. Or consider the cryptic clues left behind in a murder case, fragments of evidence that seem to taunt investigators with their elusive meaning. Some of these mysteries stretch back decades, yet they remain as fresh and unsettling as the day they first unfolded. Families still wait for answers, law enforcement still revisits old files, hoping for a breakthrough, and the public, we can't help but wonder what really happened. This isn't just about the crimes themselves, it's about the stories they leave behind, the questions that linger like ghosts in the collective memory. From disappearances that defy all reason to murders with motives lost to time, these cases pull us into a world where the truth feels just out of reach. Some have become legend, whispered about in true crime circles for generations. Others are lesser known but no less haunting, waiting for someone, maybe even you, to piece together the clues that others missed. So settle in, because what follows is a journey into the unknown, where every twist raises new questions and the answers, well, they might be stranger than you ever imagined. It was Christmas Eve, 1945, in the quiet town of Fayetteville, West Virginia, a night that should have been filled with warmth and celebration. Instead, it became the beginning of a nightmare that would haunt a family forever. The Sodder household was preparing for the holiday when, just after midnight, a fire erupted with terrifying speed. George and Jenny Sodder managed to escape with 4 of their children, but 5 others, Morris, Martha, Louie, Jenny, and Betty, were nowhere to be found. By the time the flames were extinguished, the house had burned to the ground. Yet, what investigators found, or rather what they didn't find, was impossible to explain. Despite an intense search, no remains of the 5 missing children were discovered in the ashes. Even more baffling, the fire had burned hot enough to melt metal, yet experts noted that human bones would have survived such heat. The official explanation that the children had perished and their bodies were somehow completely destroyed left gaping holes in logic, fueling theories too unsettling to ignore. Whispers of foul play spread quickly. The Sodders insisted the fire was no accident. They pointed to strange details: a broken ladder that had been propped against the house just hours before the blaze, a phone line that mysteriously went dead, even witnesses who claimed to see the missing children in a passing car that night. Some speculated the family had been targeted. George Sodder's outspoken criticism of Mussolini and rumors of mob ties suggested a possible kidnapping. Others wondered if the children had been taken for darker, more personal reasons. For decades, the Sodders refused to give up. They printed flyers, hired private investigators, even built a billboard pleading for information. But despite their relentless efforts, the truth remained maddeningly out of reach. To this day, the disappearance of the Sodder children defies explanation, a chilling reminder that some mysteries refuse to stay buried. Los Angeles in 1947 was a city of glamour and grit, where Hollywood dreams glittered beneath a darker underbelly of crime. But nothing could prepare the public for the horror that unfolded on January 15th, when a young woman's body was discovered in a vacant lot posed with chilling precision, severed at the waist and drained of blood. Elizabeth Short, just 22 years old, would become infamous as the Black Dahlia. Her murder so grotesque it transfixed the nation and spawned one of the most notorious unsolved cases in American history. The brutality of the crime was matched only by its bizarre theatricality. Elizabeth's body had been meticulously cleaned, her lips slashed into a grotesque, ear-to-ear smile known as the Glasgow grin. She'd been posed with her hands above her head, legs spread apart, as if staged for some macabre performance. But the most unsettling detail, the killer had bisected her torso with surgical precision, a detail that led investigators to suspect medical training. Yet despite the killer's apparent expertise, the crime scene yielded no fingerprints, no murder weapon, just a haunting absence of evidence where there should have been clues. What followed was a frenzy of false leads and twisted confessions. Over 50 people claimed responsibility for Elizabeth's murder, some with disturbingly detailed accounts that didn't match the facts. One suspect, a troubled woman, even mailed a package to the police containing Elizabeth's belongings and a note signed, "The Black Dahlia Avenger." But like so many others, her story unraveled under scrutiny. The press, hungry for sensation, amplified every rumor, painting Elizabeth as a femme fatale who'd courted danger, a narrative that overshadowed the real tragedy of a young woman erased too soon. Decades later, the case remains a labyrinth of dead ends. Was it the outcast surgeon who had a history of violence toward women, the wealthy socialite with a penchant for grotesque art? Or someone else entirely, a phantom who vanished into the chaos of post-war Los Angeles? Despite countless books, documentaries, and even DNA testing, Elizabeth Short's killer was never found. And the Black Dahlia's smile, frozen in time, still taunts us with its silent, unsolved mystery. The summer heat clung to the small town of Villisca, Iowa, like an unshakable presence in June 1912. It was the kind of place where neighbors knew one another's routines, where doors were often left unlocked until the morning of June 10th, when the unthinkable shattered that quiet trust. Inside a modest white house on East 2nd Street, 8 people lay dead, their lives brutally ended by an axe wielded with terrifying force. The victims included the Moore family, Josiah and Sarah, their 4 young children, and 2 young girls who had been staying overnight as guests. Every single one had been struck repeatedly in the head as they slept, their killer moving silently through the darkened home with methodical cruelty. What made the crime even more chilling was the eerie stillness left behind. The killer had taken time to cover the victims' faces with blankets, as if offering some twisted semblance of mercy. A pan of bloody water sat near the bodies, suggesting the murderer had washed up before leaving. And then there was the axe itself, left behind, leaning against a wall, its handle wiped clean of fingerprints. It was as if the killer wanted the scene to speak for itself, a grotesque tableau of violence without explanation. Suspicion swirled wildly in the aftermath. A traveling preacher, Reverend Lynn George Jacqueline Kelly, came under scrutiny after behaving strangely in the days following the murders. He'd been in town that night, even visiting the Moore family, but his alibi was shaky. Then there was the local suspect, William Mansfield, a man with a violent streak and rumored grudges. But despite multiple arrests and even a sensational trial, no one was ever convicted. The evidence was too circumstantial, the motives too murky. Over the years, the Villisca axe murders became fertile ground for speculation and ghost stories. Visitors to the now infamous house reported disembodied whispers, doors slamming on their own, even the distant sound of children's laughter where none should be. Some believe the killer's presence still lingers, imprinted on the walls like a stain that won't fade. Others insist the truth lies buried in long-forgotten clues, waiting for someone to piece together what investigators couldn't. One thing remains certain: over a century later, the question still hangs heavy in the air: who could have done something so monstrous? and why, deep in the Bavarian countryside, nestled among rolling hills and dense forests, stood the remote farmstead of Hinterkaifeck, a place that would become the setting for one of Germany's most perplexing unsolved crimes. Though the murders occurred in 1922, the case has gripped American true crime audiences for decades, not just for its brutality, but for the chilling prelude of eerie events that preceded it. The Gruber family, Andreas and Cecilia, their widowed daughter Victoria, and her two young children lived in near isolation, miles from their nearest neighbors. But in the days leading up to their deaths, something was terribly wrong. Footprints appeared in the snow, leading from the edge of the woods to the house, but none leading back. The family's maid quit abruptly, terrified after claiming she heard footsteps in the attic and finding a newspaper she swore they hadn't bought, even more unnerving. Andreas mentioned hearing strange noises in the barn, and the family's own house keys went missing. Then, on the night of March 31st, an unseen intruder took an axe to all 6 occupants, including the new maid who'd arrived just that day. The killer didn't stop there. After the murders, they stayed in the house for days, feeding the livestock, eating the family's food, even covering the bodies with hay as if to delay their discovery. When the crime was finally uncovered, the investigation only deepened the mystery. The murders bore signs of intimate familiarity. The killer knew the layout of the home, the routines of its inhabitants. Was it a disgruntled former servant, a neighbor with a hidden grudge? Suspicion even fell on Victoria's late husband, who some believed had faked his own death years earlier. But with no clear motive, no murder weapon, and no witnesses, the case grew colder with each passing year. What makes Hinterkaifeck so unforgettable isn't just the violence, it's the calculated cruelty of the killer's actions, the way they lingered unseen, toying with the family before striking. To this day, no one knows who wielded the axe or why they chose to leave behind a scene so deliberate yet so utterly inexplicable. The farm was razed to the ground, the earth salted to erase the memory of the crime. But like the footprints in the snow, some horrors refused to vanish without a trace. The fog rolled in over the San Francisco Bay Area in the late 1960s, wrapping the region in an eerie shroud fitting, perhaps, for the shadowy figure who would soon embed himself in the darkest corners of American crime history. The Zodiac Killer didn't just murder, he orchestrated a psychological siege, blending brutality with a twisted genius for spectacle. Between 1968 and 1969, he claimed at least 5 lives, though some suspect the true number could be far higher. But what set him apart wasn't just the violence, it was the elaborate game he played with law enforcement and the public, leaving behind a trail of ciphers, letters, and taunts that remain unsolved to this day. His first confirmed victims, David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, were just teenagers when they were gunned down in their car on a secluded lovers' lane in Vallejo. 22 days later, another couple, Darlene Ferrin and Michael Majow, were ambushed in a similar attack. Majow survived long enough to describe their assailant, a man in a hood, his face obscured by a strange symbol stitched onto his chest. That symbol would later become infamous, a crosshair-like design the killer himself dubbed the Zodiac sign. Then came the letters, mailed to local newspapers. They were riddled with coded messages, bragging about the murders and threatening more violence. "Dear editor," one began, "this is the murderer of the 2 teenagers last Christmas." Enclosed were portions of a cipher he claimed would reveal his identity, if anyone could crack it. The media frenzy that followed turned the Zodiac into a household name. His cryptic riddles splashed across front pages as cryptographers and amateur sleuths raced to decode them. Some ciphers were eventually solved, revealing chilling lines like, "I like killing people because it is so much fun." Others, like the infamous 340 character Z330 cipher, resisted decryption for over 50 years until a team of private citizens finally broke it in 2020. Yet even then, the message offered no names, no closure, just more questions. Theories about the Zodiac's identity have spawned decades of speculation. Was it Arthur Lee Allen, the prime suspect whose handwriting didn't match but whose behavior raised alarms? Or maybe Earl Van Best Jr., a violent convict with ties to the area? Some even suspect the letters were a hoax, a smokescreen to obscure a killer with no connection to the ciphers at all. The truth may never be known. The Zodiac's final confirmed communication arrived in 1974, a postcard eerily referencing the film The Exorcist before he vanished into silence. What lingers isn't just the fear he instilled, but the unsettling realization that he might still be out there, an old man now carrying his secrets to the grave. Or worse, that his ciphers still hold clues no one's pieced together, waiting in plain sight for someone to finally unravel the mystery. The Zodiac didn't just take lives, he crafted a legend, one that continues to taunt us with its unfinished story. The Isdal Valley in Norway is a place of stark beauty, rugged cliffs, winding trails, and a silence so profound it feels almost sacred. But on a cold November day in 1970, hikers stumbled upon a scene that shattered that tranquility. Beneath a rocky overhang lay the body of a woman, her features charred beyond recognition, her belongings carefully arranged around her. At first glance, it might have seemed like a tragic accident, a suicide even. But nothing about this case was that simple. She carried no identification, no personal effects that could reveal her name. Instead, investigators found something far stranger, a collection of wigs, disguises, and multiple passports, all bearing different aliases. Her clothing tags had been meticulously cut away. Bottles of gasoline and sleeping pills were scattered nearby, yet the autopsy revealed she'd been alive when the fire started. And then there was the bruising on her neck, signs of possible strangulation before the flames took hold. This wasn't just a death, it was an erasure. The deeper authorities dug, the more tangled the web became. Hotel registries showed she'd moved across Europe under various names, always paying in cash, always leaving minimal traces. Witnesses recalled a woman who spoke multiple languages fluently but seemed to vanish into crowds effortlessly. Some remembered her in the company of well-dressed men, exchanging hushed conversations in public places. The most chilling detail, just days before her death, she'd checked into a Bergen hotel under yet another alias, only to abruptly leave a note reading, "Room 2801 is being watched." Espionage became the prevailing theory. The Cold War was at its peak, and Norway's proximity to the Soviet Union made it a hotspot for intelligence activity. Was she a spy caught in a lethal game of double-crossing? A courier carrying secrets someone couldn't risk being exposed? Even her dental work fueled speculation, fillings made of a rare silver alloy common in Eastern Europe, yet her style suggested a woman accustomed to Western luxuries. Decades later, the Isdal Woman remains a ghost in the archives. Advances in forensic genealogy have reignited hope for identification, but her true name and the truth behind her final moments are still locked in the shadows. The most haunting question isn't just who she was, but why someone went to such lengths to ensure she'd never be known at all. It was a cold February morning in 1957 when a college student walking through Philadelphia's Fox Chase neighborhood spotted something shocking near the side of the road, a cardboard box that once held a bassinet. Inside lay the body of a small boy, no older than 4 or 5, wrapped in a flannel blanket. His hair had been crudely cut, his nails recently trimmed, and faint scars crisscrossed his skin, hinting at a short life filled with pain. But the most haunting detail, no one knew his name. Police scrambled to identify the child, distributing thousands of flyers with his likeness, even plastering his photo on milk cartons, one of the first times this tactic was ever used. Yet despite the nationwide attention, no one came forward to claim him. The boy had been malnourished with signs of long-term abuse, but the cause of death remained unclear. Had he been beaten, poisoned, or had neglect simply worn his little body down until it gave out? the medical examiner's findings only deepened the mystery. The boy's stomach contained a meal of baked beans and potatoes, a clue that suggested he died shortly after eating, but where and with whom? Over the decades, theories piled up like snowdrifts. One of the most persistent involved a nearby foster home, where whispers circulated about a woman who'd allegedly abused children in her care. Another pointed to a traveling carnival worker who'd been seen with a boy matching the description. Then there was the story of M, a mentally unstable woman who claimed her mother had bought the child from his birth parents, only for him to die accidentally during a bath. But without concrete evidence, each lead dissolved into speculation. In a strange twist, the boy's grave became a pilgrimage site of sorts. Strangers left toys, notes, and flowers, as if trying to give him in death the warmth he'd been denied in life. Even the headstone, paid for by the detective who'd worked the case, bore no name, just the words, "America's unknown child." Modern forensic science has reignited hope. In 2019, genetic genealogy led to the exhumation of the boy's remains, and in 2022, investigators finally put a name to his face: Joseph Augustus Zarelli. But while the mystery of his identity has been solved, the circumstances of his death remain shrouded in secrecy, his family's reasons for silence as inscrutable as the case itself. After 65 years, Joseph's story is no longer anonymous, but the full truth of his short, tragic life may never be known. The night of June 7, 1992, started like any other in Springfield, Missouri, quiet, ordinary, the kind of evening where nothing feels permanent. But by sunrise, 3 women had vanished from a modest home on Delmer Street without a trace, leaving behind a mystery so baffling it still rattles the town decades later. Cheryl Levitt, her daughter Susie Streeter, and Susie's friend Stacy McCall had been celebrating high school graduation that night, their laughter echoing through the humid summer air. Stacy had planned to sleep at Susie's house after a night of parties, a decision that should have been unremarkable. Instead, it became the last time anyone saw them alive. When friends stopped by the house the next morning, the scene was unsettlingly normal, yet something was off. The TV flickered silently in the living room. A cigarette dangled from an ashtray, burnt down to the filter. Purses sat lined up neatly by the door, car keys still inside. Even the family dog, a yappy little terrier named Cinnamon, was left behind, unharmed but agitated. But Cheryl, Susie, and Stacy were gone. No signs of struggle, no forced entry, no frantic calls for help. It was as if they'd simply dissolved into the pre-dawn darkness. The investigation hit dead ends almost immediately. Witnesses recalled seeing the women at parties that night, but no one remembered anything unusual. Then came the eerie lead that still sends chills down spines. A voicemail left on Susie's answering machine in the days after the disappearance. A male voice, garbled and distorted, muttered 3 cryptic words, "We're gonna kill," before the line went dead. Authorities traced the call to a payphone outside a nearby hospital, but the speaker was never identified. Was it a prank, a taunt from the abductor? Or just a cruel coincidence? Rumors swirled like smoke. Some pointed to local criminals with grudges, a violent ex-boyfriend, a shady contractor who'd done work on the house. Others whispered about connections to an unsolved double homicide from years earlier, or even human trafficking. The most haunting theory, that the women were taken shortly after arriving home, possibly by someone they knew, someone who'd been waiting. Despite national attention and relentless efforts by loved ones, the Springfield Three remain missing. Their bedrooms, preserved exactly as they were that night, are frozen in time, makeup on the dresser, beds unmade, a silent testament to lives interrupted. Over the years, tips have come in, excavations ordered, even psychic readings conducted. Yet the earth refuses to give up its secrets. In a case devoid of clear evidence, the only certainty is this: 3 women walked into a house and never walked out, and whoever took them left nothing behind but questions. Questions that, even now, demand answers. The Ural Mountains in January 1959 were a frozen wasteland, the kind of place where even breath seemed to crystallize midair. It was here that a group of experienced hikers, led by Igor Dyatlov, embarked on what should have been a routine expedition. But when the team failed to check in, rescuers launched a search that would uncover a scene so inexplicable it has haunted the world for decades. The tent was found slashed open from the inside, as if the occupants had fled in terror. Footprints led away into the snow barefoot or clad only in socks despite temperatures plunging to -22 degrees Fahrenheit. Then came the bodies. Some were found huddled together near a makeshift fire, their clothing barely sufficient for the cold. Others were scattered farther away as if they'd run in different directions. But it was the injuries that defied all logic. One hiker had a fractured skull, yet no external wounds. Another's tongue was missing, seemingly ripped from her mouth. Two of the victims had chest fractures so severe, experts compared the force to a car crash, yet there were no signs of an avalanche or animal attack. Even stranger, some of the bodies showed traces of radiation on their clothing, and a few were dressed in garments that didn't belong to them, hastily stitched together from scraps. The official explanation, an unknown compelling force, did little to satisfy the public's hunger for answers. Conspiracy theories erupted like geysers. Had the hikers stumbled upon a secret Soviet military experiment, triggering a fatal encounter with armed forces? Some pointed to the strange orange lights witnesses reported in the sky that night, suggesting a UFO or missile test. Others theorized about infrasound low-frequency noise from wind patterns that can induce panic, or even a rare meteorological phenomenon like a katabatic wind. But none of these fully account for the sheer brutality of the injuries or the hikers' frantic, disoriented flight. Decades later, modern scientists have revisited the case, offering new possibilities. Computer simulations suggest a small avalanche could explain the tent's collapse, prompting the group to cut their way out in panic. The bizarre injuries, possibly the result of post-mortem animal scavenging or the effects of hypothermia, induced paradoxical undressing. Yet even these theories leave gaps. Why were some victims' internal injuries so catastrophic without external trauma? What explains the radiation, and why, after all these years, does the Dyatlov Pass incident still grip our imagination with such relentless force? Perhaps it's the sheer vulnerability it exposes, the idea that even skilled adventurers prepared for the wilderness could be obliterated by something beyond comprehension. Or maybe it's the chilling detail that one hiker's camera was recovered, its final photos showing nothing but darkness, as if whatever came for them left no trace but its aftermath. The Dyatlov Pass incident isn't just a mystery, it's a riddle wrapped in the unforgiving cold, a reminder that nature, or something far more sinister, can still keep its secrets. Oklahoma's rugged Kiamichi Mountains are the kind of place where isolation can swallow you whole, vast stretches of wilderness where a single wrong turn can lead to miles of uncharted terrain. It was here in October 2009 that Bobby, Sherilyn, and their 6-year-old daughter Madison Jameson set out to scout land they hoped to buy, a fresh start for the young family. But when their pickup truck was found days later, idling on a remote logging road with the keys still in the ignition, the scene that greeted investigators wasn't just puzzling, it was downright unnerving. Inside the vehicle, everything seemed frozen in time. Sherilyn's purse sat untouched, stuffed with over $32,000 in cash, hardly the behavior of people planning to vanish. A GPS device, still powered on, showed no signs of distress or rerouted directions. Then there were the photos, dozens of them recently taken, scattered across the seats. Some showed the family smiling near their truck, but others were far more unsettling shots of Madison standing alone in the woods, her expression blank, her posture oddly stiff, as if someone had positioned her there. Even stranger, a few images appeared to have been taken at night, the flash illuminating twisted tree branches that loomed like skeletal fingers against the black sky. Neighbors reported odd behavior in the days before the disappearance. Bobby had mentioned feeling watched, claiming strangers were prowling near their home. Sherilyn, normally outgoing, had grown withdrawn, telling friends she feared someone was coming for them. And then there were the rumors, whispers of drug deals gone wrong, of a possible connection to a local meth ring. But nothing solid ever emerged. Even the family dog, a blue heeler named Mate, had been left behind, howling inconsolably from their porch as days stretched into weeks with no sign of his owners. Search teams combed the mountains, scouring ravines and creek beds, but found no trace. Years later, skeletal remains were discovered just 3 miles from where the truck was abandoned, too degraded for immediate identification, but reigniting hope for answers. Tests eventually confirmed the bones belonged to Bobby and Sherilyn, though Madison's fate remains unknown. Were they victims of foul play, lured into the wilderness by someone they trusted? Or did the family succumb to some shared psychological break, wandering into the woods under the weight of paranoia? Those haunting photos offer no clarity, only more questions. Why take them at all? What or who were they trying to document? And why leave behind a small fortune if they intended to run? The Jameson case lingers like a fog over the Kiamiches, a reminder that even in the age of digital footprints and surveillance, entire families can still slip through the cracks. Their story isn't just about disappearance, it's about the eerie clues left behind, fragments of a puzzle that refuse to fit together no matter how hard you try. The sun beat down on Glenelg Beach that sweltering Australia day in 1966, the air thick with the laughter of children and the salty tang of the ocean. It should have been just another carefree summer afternoon for the Beaumont siblings, 9-year-old Jane, 7-year-old Anna, and 4-year-old Grant. Their parents, Jim and Nancy Beaumont, had dropped them off at the beach, a routine outing in their close-knit Adelaide suburb. The children were seasoned beachgoers, trusted to play near the familiar kiosk where they'd bought pasties and drinks countless times before. But by 3 o'clock that afternoon, the Beaumonts' world shattered. The kids never returned to their meeting spot. No frantic searches by lifeguards turned up a trace. No witnesses reported seeing them struggle in the surf. They were simply gone. What made the disappearance so chilling was the sheer brazenness of it. Witnesses later recalled a tall, blond man in his mid-30s playing with the children building sandcastles, even helping Jane change out of her swimsuit. At the time, no one thought much of it. Strangers often struck up conversations at the beach. But when investigators pieced together the timeline, the details curdled into something sinister. The man had allegedly bought the children snacks, even sending Jane to the kiosk with a £1 note, an oddly generous gesture. Later, witnesses saw the three walking hand in hand with the same man toward a nearby parking lot, their demeanor relaxed as if they knew him. Whether it was coercion or deception, the children followed willingly, vanishing into the afternoon glare without a struggle. The case became Australia's most extensive missing persons investigation, rewriting the nation's approach to child safety. For the first time, police distributed mass-produced missing person flyers with the children's photos. Helicopters scoured the coastline. Psychics were brought in, one claiming the siblings were buried beneath a concrete warehouse, a tip that led to a frantic excavation, but no answers. The public became obsessed, flooding authorities with tips, including a harrowing letter supposedly written by Jane, postmarked years later, that began, "Dear Mummy, I am still alive." Handwriting analysis proved inconclusive, leaving the family trapped in a limbo of hope and horror. Decades of false leads deepened the mystery. A convicted child killer, Arthur Stanley Brown, emerged as a suspect, but evidence was circumstantial. Another theory pointed to Bev and Spencer von Einem, a notorious serial killer linked to other abductions, yet nothing concrete tied him to the Beaumonts. Even the beach itself seemed to taunt investigators, sand shifting with the tides, erasing any potential clues. What lingers isn't just the tragedy, but the cultural scar it left. The Beaumont case marked the end of an era in Australia, a time when children roamed freely without fear. Today, Jane, Anna, and Grant would be in their 60s, their faces frozen in grainy black and white photos, a reminder of lives abruptly severed. No graves, no closure, just 3 empty beds in a quiet suburban house, and a question that still echoes across generations. Who walked out of that sunlight with them, and where did they go? The Brazilian coastline near Rio de Janeiro is usually a place of vibrant energy, golden sand, crashing waves, and the rhythmic pulse of samba floating on the breeze. But on August 20th, 1966, a scene unfolded on those same shores that would stamp the area with an entirely different reputation. 2 men lay side by side on a grassy hill in Vintame Park, their bodies eerily still, their faces obscured by strange, handmade lead masks. This wasn't just a death scene. It was a riddle wrapped in metal and left for the world to decode. The men were soon identified as Miguel José Viana and Manuel Pereira da Cruz, skilled electronics technicians from nearby Niterói. Both were dressed in formal suits despite the humid weather, their bodies positioned almost ceremonially. The lead masks, crudely crafted with narrow slits for the eyes, clung to their faces like some grotesque science experiment. Nearby, investigators found an empty water bottle, a damp towel, and 2 cryptic notes. One read, 16:30 hours to be at the agreed location. 18:30 hours to swallow the capsules. After the effect is proven, protect the faces with the masks. The other was even more enigmatic. The protection mask brings the final piece. Autopsies revealed no signs of trauma, poisoning, or struggle, just healthy men who'd inexplicably dropped dead. The capsules mentioned in the note were never found, leaving toxicologists to wonder if the men had ingested something that left no trace. And then there was the radioactivity. Rumors swirled that traces had been detected on their clothing, though official reports remained inconclusive. Were they attempting some bizarre ritual? Had they stumbled into something far more dangerous than they understood? Theories ranged from the tragic to the extraterrestrial. Some insisted the men were part of a secretive occult group, using lead to block harmful energies during a doomed ritual. Others pointed to their profession. Electronics experts might have had access to radioactive materials or experimental technology, the most chilling hypothesis. That they'd been told to expect contact with something not of this world, and the masks were meant to shield them from forces they couldn't comprehend. A local UFO researcher later claimed the pair had visited him days earlier, asking strange questions about protection from cosmic radiation. What makes the lead masks case so unforgettable isn't just the unanswered questions, it's the calculated precision of the men's actions. They hadn't stumbled into death, they'd walked toward it knowingly, following steps laid out with cold deliberation. Were they victims of a hoax gone wrong, willing participants in an experiment that spiraled out of control, or something even darker, 2 ordinary men who believed, right up until the end, that they were on the brink of something extraordinary? The case remains as opaque as the masks themselves. No cults came forward to claim them. No hidden lab notes surfaced to explain the cryptic instructions. Even their families were baffled, insisting the men had shown no signs of distress or obsession in the days before their deaths. All that's left are those lead masks, blank, unreadable, and utterly silent. It was November 22nd, 1987, just another evening of routine television for viewers in Chicago. Families were settling in to watch Doctor Who on PBS when suddenly the screen flickered. Static hissed through speakers, and then, without warning, the broadcast was hijacked. A distorted, mask-like face filled millions of screens, its jerky movements and eerie, digitized voice unmistakable. The intruder had taken on the persona of Max Headroom, the glitchy, fictional AI from pop culture. But this was no official promo. For nearly 90 seconds, the figure rambled in disjointed phrases, giggling manically, uttering bizarre lines like, "Your love is fading," and even bending over to expose his bare backside while someone spanked him with a fly swatter. Then, as abruptly as it began, the signal cut out, normal programming resumed, and Chicago was left staring at their TVs, wondering if they'd hallucinated the whole thing. The intrusion wasn't just creepy, it was technically baffling. Hijacking a broadcast signal requires sophisticated equipment and precise timing. The intruder had struck twice that night, first briefly during a sports report on WGN-TV, then more extensively during the PBS broadcast. Engineers traced the source to a rooftop antenna near the Sears Tower, but by the time authorities arrived, the culprit had vanished, leaving behind only a trail of questions. How had they overpowered the station's transmitters without detection? And why go to such lengths for what seemed like a surreal, slapstick prank? Theories over the years have ranged from rogue TV engineers to underground hacker collectives. Some speculated it was an inside job given the technical knowledge required. Others pointed to amateur radio enthusiasts, citing the intruder's garbled references to clowns and Clyde, possibly nods to FCC enforcement agents. The most compelling lead came decades later, when an anonymous confession surfaced online from someone claiming to be part of the duo responsible, but with no verifiable proof. It only deepened the mystery. What makes the Max Headroom intrusion unforgettable isn't just its brazenness, but its lingering aura of absurdity. In an era before deepfakes and viral hacking, this was a wake-up call about the vulnerability of media, and a reminder that some mysteries aren't about violence or tragedy, but about the sheer, unsettling power of disruption. Whoever was behind that mask, they didn't just hijack a broadcast, they hijacked the collective imagination, leaving behind a glitch in history that still refuses to be debugged. The morning of December 1st, 1948, dawned bright and clear over Somerton Beach in Adelaide, Australia, a postcard-perfect scene that would soon become the backdrop for one of the most perplexing mysteries in criminal history. A well-dressed man lay sprawled near the water's edge, his body propped against the seawall as if he'd simply sat down to rest. Passers-by initially assumed he was sleeping, his head tilted slightly back, his legs extended comfortably. But by noon, the truth was undeniable. This man wasn't asleep, he was dead. What made the scene so baffling wasn't just the absence of violence, no wounds, no signs of struggle, but the eerie completeness of his anonymity. His pockets held no wallet, no identification, just a bus ticket from the city and an unused train ticket to nearby Henley Beach. The labels had been meticulously cut from his clothing. Even his dental records matched no known missing persons, and then there was the tiny slip of paper, tightly rolled and hidden in a concealed fob pocket sewn into his trousers. Unfurled, it revealed two words that would haunt investigators for decades. Tamam Shud, a Persian phrase meaning "it is finished" or "the end," torn from the final page of a rare edition of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. The book itself turned up weeks later, tossed into the backseat of an unlocked car parked near the beach. Inside, faint indentations suggested something had been hastily scribbled and torn away. But beneath ultraviolet light, a startling discovery emerged, a string of seemingly random letters, jotted as if in code. Even more chilling, a local nurse came forward, revealing she'd been given a copy of the Rubaiyat by a mystery man months earlier, a man who'd vanished after asking about her views on the perfect woman. When shown the Somerton man's death mask, she visibly trembled but refused to confirm if she knew him. Forensic examination deepened the intrigue. The man's spleen was massively enlarged and his stomach showed signs of acute poisoning, yet no toxins were ever identified. His calf muscles were unusually developed, like a dancer's or a long-distance runner's, and his toes splayed oddly, hinting at a lifetime in pointed shoes. Some speculated he was a spy, citing Cold War tensions and the book's ties to wartime intelligence codes. Others wondered if the code was a red herring and his death far more personal, a jilted lover's suicide perhaps, or a victim silenced for knowing too much. 75 years later, genetic genealogy finally put a name to the body: Carl Charles Webb, an electrical engineer from Melbourne, but the revelation only spawned new questions. Why was a bookish, unassuming man hundreds of miles from home with no explanation? Why the elaborate concealment of his identity? And what, if anything, did those cryptic letters truly mean? The Somerton man's secrets didn't die with him. They simply folded themselves deeper into history, waiting, like the tide that once brushed his lifeless hand, to reveal what they'd taken. The quiet town of Circleville, Ohio, was the kind of place where neighbors waved from porches and front doors stayed unlocked until the late 1970s, when a series of sinister letters began arriving in mailboxes, shattering that sense of safety. The first notes were crude but unsettling, scrawled in block letters on loose leaf paper, accusing local residents of infidelity, corruption, and worse. But what started as disturbing gossip soon escalated into something far darker. The letters weren't just malicious, they were laced with threats so precise, so unnervingly personal, it was clear the sender wasn't guessing. They knew secrets no stranger should. One of the first targets was Mary Gillespie, a school bus driver whose life unraveled after she received a letter accusing her of an affair with the local school superintendent. The accusations were false, but the fallout was real. Her husband, Ron, became obsessed with unmasking the writer, even installing a hidden microphone in her car to catch the culprit. Then, in August 1977, Ron was found dead in his car on a deserted road, a single gunshot wound to the head. The official ruling was suicide, but the circumstances defied belief. The gun was found oddly placed, his hands showed no gunpowder residue, and the trajectory of the bullet didn't match someone pulling the trigger themselves. The letters didn't stop. If anything, they grew bolder. A local judge, Paul Fresher, became the next target, receiving threats that referenced details only someone close to the case could know. Then, in 1983, Fresher was arrested after a letter was allegedly traced to his typewriter, a note warning Mary to get out of town or else. Despite maintaining his innocence, he was convicted of attempted intimidation and served time. But the mystery only deepened. Letters continued to arrive even while he was behind bars, taunting investigators with lines like, "You think you've caught me, but you're wrong." Then came the most chilling twist of all. In 1994, a farmer named David Longberry claimed to have found a metal box buried in his field. Inside were more letters, a gun, and a mask, all seemingly tied to the case. But before he could turn it over to authorities, he died under suspicious circumstances, his truck crashing into a tree under conditions witnesses called eerily controlled. To this day, no one knows who penned the Circleville letters. Was it a jealous neighbor, a disgruntled co-worker, or something more calculated, a predator who hid behind the mundane facade of small-town life, weaponizing gossip and fear? The letters stopped as abruptly as they began, leaving behind a trail of ruined lives and a question that still haunts Pickaway County. Was the writer ever really caught, or did they simply choose to disappear? Columbus, Ohio, in 2006 was a bustling college town, its bars packed every weekend with students unwinding after classes. Among them was Brian Schaffer, a bright 27-year-old medical student at Ohio State University, popular, ambitious, and by all accounts, living a life with no glaring red flags. On the night of April 1st, Brian went out with friends to celebrate the start of spring break at the Ugly Tuna Saloona, a crowded bar in the South Campus Gateway complex. He was last seen laughing near the bar's entrance around 2 in the morning. Then, as if swallowed by thin air, he ceased to exist. What makes Brian's disappearance so unnerving is the concrete impossibility of it. The Ugly Tuna had multiple surveillance cameras covering every exit, including a rear service door used by staff, yet not a single frame shows Brian leaving. Investigators combed through hours of footage, watching him enter, watching his friends eventually leave without him. But Brian never reappeared. The bar wasn't some labyrinthine venue with hidden passages. It was a straightforward space with limited exits. Even if he'd slipped out undetected, where would he have gone? His apartment keys, phone, and wallet were all left behind, ruling out a spontaneous trip. His bank accounts and credit cards lay dormant. His passport collected dust at home. Rumors swirled, of course. Some speculated he'd staged his own disappearance, though friends insisted Brian had no reason to flee. He was weeks away from a dream trip to Miami with his girlfriend, and his medical career was on track. Others whispered about foul play, pointing to a strained relationship with his father, who died in a freak accident just weeks before Brian vanished. Then there was the eerie detail of his cell phone pinging once, days later, in a location near campus, but by the time authorities traced it, the signal was gone. The most haunting theory, that Brian never left the bar at all. Some investigators privately wondered if he'd fallen into a construction area adjacent to the Ugly Tuna, a site later paved over without thorough examination. Others questioned whether someone inside the bar, a patron, a staff member, had intervened in a way cameras didn't capture. But with no body, no witness accounts, and no digital breadcrumbs, the case became a maddening loop of dead ends. 18 years later, Brian's face still appears on missing persons posters across Ohio. His family clings to fragments of hope, insisting someone somewhere must know something. But for now, the Ugly Tuna's cameras hold the only record of his final moments, a flickering, silent testament to a question that refuses to fade. How does someone vanish from a crowded room without a single person noticing? For years after the fire, the Sodder family refused to accept the official explanation that their 5 children had perished in the flames. George and Jenny clung to every scrap of hope, missing teeth found in the ashes that didn't match their children's dental records, reports from witnesses who swore they'd seen the kids alive after that fateful night. But perhaps the most persistent thread in this tangled mystery came from an unexpected source, a photograph. In 1968, 23 years after the fire, Jenny received an anonymous letter in the mail. Inside was a grainy black and white image of a young man who bore a striking resemblance to Morris, the oldest of the missing Sodder children. The note accompanying it was brief and cryptic: Louis Sodder. I love brother Frankie, A 90,132 or 35. The numbers matched the serial code on a military dog tag, but investigators hit a dead end when tracing it. The photo itself became a haunting relic, scrutinized by experts and family alike. Was it Morris grown into adulthood, a cruel hoax, or evidence that at least one of the children had survived? Decades later, new leads emerged from an unlikely place, a Florida nursing home. A woman named Florence Hatfield claimed on her deathbed that she'd known one of the missing Sodder girls, Jenny, the youngest, who'd allegedly been brought to Florida by a shadowy couple shortly after the fire. According to Hatfield, the girl had been given a new identity and raised under a different name, unaware of her true origins. While the story was impossible to verify, it reignited speculation that the children had been kidnapped and dispersed, possibly as part of a larger scheme tied to George Sodder's outspoken anti-fascist views. Forensic advancements offered another glimmer of hope. In 2016, researchers applied modern soil analysis techniques to the Sodder property, searching for traces of human remains that might have been overlooked in the original investigation. The results were inconclusive, but the very fact that scientists were still probing the case underscored its enduring grip on the public imagination. Even now, amateur sleuths comb through declassified FBI files, parsing faded notes for clues that might have been dismissed too quickly in the post-war era. One document in particular stands out, a report from a Charleston taxi driver who claimed to have picked up 2 children matching the Sodders' descriptions on the night of the fire, only for them to vanish at a bus station. The lead was never pursued, just another loose thread in a tapestry of what-ifs. The Sodder house itself is long gone, the land reclaimed by grass and trees. But the family's billboard still stood for years along Route 16, its weathered plea, "Who took our 5 children?" A silent scream into the void. George and Jenny passed away without answers, their grief a testament to the cruelest kind of limbo, not knowing. Today, descendants of the surviving Sodder children keep the search alive, digitizing records and lobbying for renewed attention from law enforcement. In an age of DNA databases and global connectivity, they hold onto the fragile belief that truth, no matter how buried, has a way of surfacing. After all these years, the question isn't just what happened to Morris, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty. It's whether justice, however delayed, might still find its way home. The Black Dahlia case has been dissected for generations, with theories branching out like dark roots beneath the surface of Hollywood's golden age, while names like George Hodel and Dr. Walter Bailey dominate most discussions. Lesser-known suspects lurk in the shadows of this unsolved nightmare figures, whose stories weave a far more tangled web than the public often realizes. Take, for instance, Leslie Dillon, a bellhop-turned-mortician whose intimate knowledge of dissection techniques raised eyebrows. He'd worked in funeral homes across the country, mastering the very skills needed to bisect a body with surgical precision. Police even found a copy of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam in his possession, the same text linked to the cryptic Tamam Shud note in the Somerton Man case. But alibis and insufficient evidence let Dillon slip through the cracks, leaving investigators to wonder if they'd missed a ghost hiding in plain sight. Then there's the chilling possibility that Elizabeth Short's murder wasn't an isolated act. Some researchers point to the lipstick murders of the mid-1940s, where women in Chicago were found similarly posed and mutilated. One victim, Frances Brown, had her mouth slashed ear to ear, a grotesque parallel to the Dahlia's Glasgow grin. Even more unsettling, a suspect in those killings, William Aarons, scrawled, "For heaven's sake catch me before I kill more," on a victim's wall. Though Aarons later confessed under dubious circumstances, the similarities nag at the edges of coincidence, suggesting a killer who might have drifted westward with a taste for theatrical violence. Modern forensics have peeled back layers of time, offering new angles on old evidence. In 2019, a team of cold case specialists applied contemporary blood spatter analysis to crime scene photos, revealing something original investigators missed: the absence of arterial spray. This suggests Elizabeth was likely drained of blood before being posed, possibly in a separate location. A detail that aligns with witnesses who reported seeing her alive days after her official disappearance. Then there's the infamous werewolf letter, a confession sent to the press that included a map allegedly drawn in the killer's own blood. Recent DNA testing on the envelope flap excluded known suspects like Hodel, but the sample was too degraded for a definitive match, leaving the door cracked just wide enough for doubt. Perhaps the most haunting theory isn't about who killed Elizabeth, but why her case remains unsolved. Some whisper of a cover-up, noting that her autopsy report vanished for decades before mysteriously resurfacing in the 90s, heavily redacted. Others speculate her killer had ties to powerful circles, someone shielded by the era's corruption. Whatever the truth, the Black Dahlia's legacy isn't just a crime story. It's a mirror reflecting our obsession with unsolved mysteries, the way they gnaw at the edges of certainty. And as long as her photograph stares back at us from history, that enigmatic half-smile frozen in time, the question lingers: will we ever really know? When the axe fell in Villisca that sweltering June night, it didn't just claim 8 lives, it carved a wound so deep into the town's psyche that suspicion festered for generations. At the center of the storm stood Reverend Lynn George Jacqueline Kelly, a traveling preacher whose presence in Villisca that very evening felt like more than coincidence. Witnesses recalled him behaving erratically in the days after the murders, delivering sermons laced with disturbing references to blood atonement and even allegedly attempting to sell a bloodstained suit. But Kelly's alibi was slippery. He claimed he'd been miles away, yet railroad timetables and witness accounts didn't quite add up. When pressed, his explanations shifted like sand, and his fascination with the crime bordered on obsession. He penned graphic letters to newspapers describing the murders in unnerving detail, as if replaying the scene in his mind. Yet without physical evidence tying him to the Moore house, authorities could only watch as Kelly drifted to another town, his shadow trailing behind him like a stain. Then there was William Mansfield, a local farmhand with a reputation for volatility. His estranged wife and child had perished under mysterious circumstances years earlier, and whispers painted him as a man capable of unfathomable rage. Some claimed he'd quarreled with Josiah Moore over money. Others insisted he'd been seen near the house that night, his overalls darkened with what might have been blood. The most damning link, his brother-in-law, Frank Jones, was a wealthy businessman locked in a bitter feud with Moore, a feud that some believe Mansfield might have resolved with an axe. But like Kelly, Mansfield slipped through the net. Witnesses recounted, evidence evaporated, and by the time a grand jury convened, the case against him crumbled like old newspaper. The most chilling suspect of all, though, wasn't tied to Villisca at all, at least not at first. Serial killer Henry Lee Moore, active in the same era, had a signature as brutal as it was consistent, bludgeoning entire families with an axe as they slept. His spree stretched from Colorado to New Jersey, with victims arranged in eerily similar poses to those in Villisca, faces covered, bodies left in bed as if tucked in by death itself. Moore even shared the same surname as the murdered family, a coincidence so uncanny it couldn't be ignored. But geography betrayed the theory. Moore was incarcerated in Missouri at the time of the Villisca killings, his alibi verified by prison records. Unless he'd orchestrated the massacre from behind bars, a near impossibility, the thread snapped before it could weave into a pattern. What lingers isn't just the question of who swung the axe, but why justice remained perpetually out of reach. Corruption rumors swirled around the investigation, with allegations that powerful figures suppressed evidence to protect their own. Some pointed to the botched crime scene trampled by gawkers before proper documentation, while others blamed the era's rudimentary forensics. But perhaps the darkest possibility is that the killer walked among Villisca's survivors, blending into the crowd of mourners, his guilt hidden beneath a mask of normalcy. After all, the axe was left leaning against the wall, not carried away in panic. That wasn't the act of a fleeing man. It was a message, one that still whispers across the decades: I was here. And I could be anyone. The Zodiac Killer didn't just leave behind bodies, he left behind a labyrinth of coded messages, twisting language into a puzzle only he understood. While investigators eventually cracked some of his ciphers, 3 remained stubbornly unbroken, their secrets locked away like artifacts from a ghost. The most infamous of these is the Z330 cipher, a jumble of 63 symbols that defied decryption for over half a century. Then there's the shorter Z340, just 13 characters long yet somehow more impenetrable than its longer counterpart. And finally, the unsolved segment of the 340 cipher, a fragment that even modern supercomputers can't untangle. These aren't just random scribbles, they're taunts from beyond the grave, a killer's final laugh echoing through time. What makes these codes so insidious is their deliberate design. Unlike classic substitution ciphers, where each letter stands in for another, the zodiac symbols operate on multiple layers. Some characters represent single letters, others whole words, and a few serve as nulls, red herrings meant to mislead. He even boasted about this in his letters, gloating that his codes would be impossible to trace without the key. For years, cryptographers assumed he was bluffing. Then in 2020, a breakthrough, a team of amateur codebreakers using a mix of brute force computing and linguistic pattern recognition finally cracked the Z330. The message, a chilling ramble about killing to secure slaves for the afterlife. Grotesque, yes, but still no closer to revealing his identity. The remaining ciphers have become holy grails for armchair detectives and professional cryptanalysts alike. Online forums buzz with theories, from anagrams based on Zodiac's misspellings to mathematical approaches involving prime numbers. Some believe the key lies in the killer's obsession with astrology, pointing to celestial alignments as possible cipher templates. Others argue the codes are pure nonsense, crafted to waste investigators' time. The most compelling clue might be hiding in plain sight: a postcard Zodiac sent in 1970, featuring a string of numbers that cryptographers suspect could unlock the 340 cipher. But without context, it's like trying to open a vault with half a combination. Even the FBI has thrown its weight behind the hunt, declassifying files and crowdsourcing solutions through its cryptanalysis and racketeering records unit. Modern tools like artificial intelligence have been deployed, scanning for patterns invisible to the human eye. Yet progress is glacial, part of the problem. Zodiac's codes lack the consistency of wartime ciphers. They're erratic, personal, possibly even flawed, a reflection of a mind that thrived on chaos. The enduring fascination isn't just about solving a puzzle. It's about the slim chance that somewhere in those symbols lies a name, a location, a confession. Or maybe nothing at all. That's the cruelest twist. After decades of obsession, we might finally crack the code, only to find it was never the answer we wanted. The Zodiac didn't just encrypt words, he encrypted himself, leaving behind a trail of symbols as empty as the grave he likely escaped. And until those last ciphers yield their secrets, the game he started in the summer of '69 isn't over. It's just waiting for the next move. The Isdal Woman didn't just travel, she ghosted through Europe like a specter with no fixed identity. From Belgium to Germany, Norway to Austria, her trail was a web of false names, cash payments, and meticulously altered appearances. Hotel registries showed her checking in as Claudia Tylt, Vera Jal, and Alexia Zana Merche, among others. Each alias came with subtle shifts in persona, a wig here, a change in accent there. Witnesses described a woman who could switch languages effortlessly, fluent in German, French, and English, yet always careful to reveal nothing of her origins. This wasn't just the behavior of someone hiding. It was the hallmark of a professional who knew how to vanish into the background noise of Cold War Europe. Espionage wasn't just a theory, it was the only scenario that explained the sheer precision of her erasure. The 1970s were peak tension between East and West, and Norway, with its strategic NATO ties and proximity to Soviet waters, was a hotbed of intelligence activity. The Isdal Woman's movements aligned eerily with military installations and naval bases. In Bergen, she'd booked a room overlooking the harbor where Allied submarines docked. In Oslo, she stayed near a research facility rumored to be developing sonar technology. Even her timing was suspect. Her death coincided with a surge in clandestine operations targeting Scandinavian defense networks. Then there were the artifacts left behind. The lead-lined suitcases, the coded notebooks, the multiple watches set to different time zones, all standard tradecraft for field agents. But the most telling detail, the chemical burns on her clothing. Analysis revealed traces of dimethyl sulfoxide, a compound used in top-secret document transfer techniques to dissolve ink under heat. This wasn't the toolkit of a tourist or a runaway. It was the inventory of someone who dealt in secrets too dangerous to carry openly. Yet for all the spycraft, the human element refuses to be ignored. In one hotel, a receptionist recalled the woman humming a lullaby under her breath, a tune later identified as a folk melody common in the Lorraine region of France. A shopkeeper remembered her lingering over a display of children's gloves, her face unreadable. These fragments suggest a life more complicated than a mere mission dossier. Was she a runaway from her own past, a double agent caught between loyalties, or a pawn sacrificed in a game she never fully controlled? The closest thing to a breakthrough came decades later, when forensic genealogists reconstructed a possible ancestry linking her to Eastern Europe. Dental isotopes hinted at a childhood near the Franco-German border, while DNA suggested Ashkenazi Jewish roots, but without definitive matches to living relatives, the trail dissolves into speculation. Even her age remains contested. Some estimates place her in her 30s, others in her late 40s, as if she manipulated time itself. What lingers isn't just the mystery of her identity, but the chilling efficiency of her disappearance. In an era before biometric databases and facial recognition, the Isdal Woman proved how thoroughly a person could be unmade. Her killers, assuming there were any, didn't just silence her. They made sure no one would ever know she'd existed at all, and in that perhaps lies the darkest truth of all: some secrets aren't meant to be found. For decades, the boy in the box was the ultimate cold case, a nameless child whose story seemed destined to remain frozen in time. But in 2022, science finally cracked open the vault of silence. Advanced DNA testing and forensic genealogy, the same tools that unmasked the Golden State Killer, breathed life back into the investigation. Researchers extracted genetic material from the boy's exhumed remains, then cross-referenced it with public genealogy databases, tracing distant relatives like breadcrumbs through history. The result, a name etched into the case file at last: Joseph Augustus Zarelli, born around 1953, his short life bookended by tragedy. Yet the revelation raised more questions than it answered. Joseph's birth records showed he'd been born to parents whose identities remained shielded by court order, an unusual step that set off whispers of powerful families or institutional cover-ups. His ancestry traced back to prominent Philadelphia lineages, yet no missing child reports matched his description. Even more perplexing, the condition of his body suggested prolonged abuse, making it unlikely his disappearance went unnoticed. Someone knew, someone had to, so why did no one speak up? Recent breakthroughs have narrowed the focus to a specific West Philadelphia household. A woman identified only as Martha came forward decades ago, claiming her mother had purchased Joseph from his birth parents, only for him to die accidentally during a bath. Her story was dismissed at the time, but genealogical evidence now places her family within Joseph's genetic orbit. Could this be the missing link, or was Martha herself a victim of trauma, weaving a tale to distance herself from something darker? Investigators are tight-lipped, but leaks suggest they're chasing a lead involving a now-deceased couple who fostered multiple children under suspicious circumstances. What makes Joseph's case so haunting isn't just the horror of his death, it's the silence that followed. In a bustling post-war city, how does a child vanish without so much as a neighbor's curiosity? The answer might lie in the shadows of mid-century America, where orphanages and informal adoptions operated with little oversight, and abuse often went unchallenged behind closed doors. Even now, Philadelphia clings to its secrets. The city's refusal to release Joseph's parents' names, citing ongoing investigations, fuels speculation that the truth implicates figures who once moved through these streets with impunity. The boy in the box's legacy endures not just as a murder mystery, but as a mirror held up to societal failure. His grave, once marked unknown, now bears his name, but the epitaph might as well read unheard. For every breakthrough, there's a reminder: science can identify bones, but it can't always uncover the lies that buried them. And until those last whispers surface, Joseph's story remains unfinished, a plea for answers that echoes louder with each passing year. The last hours of Cheryl Levitt, Susie Streeter, and Stacy McCall unfolded with eerie normalcy, their actions marking the final strokes of a life abruptly cut short. That evening, Susie and Stacy had been buzzing with post-graduation excitement. bouncing between parties with friends who later recalled nothing out of the ordinary, just laughter, bad dance moves, and the giddy relief of high school's end. Around 2 in the morning, Stacy made the fateful decision to crash at Susie's house instead of driving home, a choice that should have been inconsequential. Meanwhile, Cheryl, a meticulous mother who always triple-checked locks, had left her front door slightly ajar, as if expecting her daughter's return. None of them could have known those small, everyday choices would become the last puzzle pieces investigators would ever have. What happened next exists only in fragments. Neighbors reported no screams, no car tires screeching away, just the hum of cicadas and the occasional flicker of headlights passing Delma Street. Yet inside the house, subtle anomalies whispered of disruption. A lamp lay toppled near the couch, its bulb still warm when detectives arrived. Cigarette butts in the ashtray had burned down untouched, suggesting Cheryl might have been interrupted mid-smoke. Most haunting of all, the trio's purses sat lined up by the door, car keys tucked inside, as if they'd intended to leave but never made it beyond the threshold. Then came the cryptic breadcrumbs that deepened the mystery. A neighbor's dog barked incessantly around 4 in the morning, an anomaly in the otherwise placid neighborhood. Down the street, a man in a white sedan was spotted idling near the house hours before the disappearances, never identified, never seen again. But the most chilling detail emerged days later when Susie's answering machine played back that garbled voicemail, 3 words, "We're gonna kill," followed by muffled static. Police traced the call to a payphone outside Cox Hospital, yet surveillance footage from that night had already been recorded over, erasing what might have been a critical lead. The absence of forced entry fuels the most unsettling theory that the women knew their abductor. A close friend later confessed that Susie had mentioned a creepy guy harassing her at work, while Cheryl's ex-boyfriend had a history of volatile behavior. Others pointed to a local contractor who'd done work on the house weeks earlier, a man with a criminal record who'd reportedly made inappropriate comments about the women. But without physical evidence, no fingerprints, no DNA, speculation became a hall of mirrors, each reflection distorting the truth further. Even the house itself seemed to guard its secrets. Cadaver dogs initially hit on a scent near the basement, but excavation revealed nothing. Years later, a construction crew working nearby unearthed a patch of disturbed earth, sparking a frantic dig only to find animal bones. The most promising lead came in 2007, when a psychic's vision of the women buried beneath a parking lot prompted ground-penetrating radar scans. The equipment detected anomalies beneath the concrete, but funding ran out before further exploration could begin. What lingers isn't just the question of who took them, but how 3 lives could vanish without leaving a single thread to pull. In most disappearances, there's a fractured alibi, a suspicious purchase, a deleted text, something. Here, there's only stillness. The Springfield Three didn't just disappear. They were plucked from existence with a precision that feels almost supernatural. Their bedrooms remain frozen in time, perfumes still sitting on dressers, beds left unmade, as if waiting for occupants who will never return. And in that silence lies the cruelest truth of all. Some doors, once closed, may never reopen. The Dyatlov Pass Incident has long been a magnet for wild theories, Soviet weapons tests, Yeti attacks, even vengeful spirits lurking in the Ural Mountains. But recent research has shifted the focus from folklore to physics, offering explanations rooted in the natural world that are no less terrifying for their lack of conspiracy. One of the most compelling new theories points to infrasound, low-frequency noise generated by high winds funneling through the mountain pass. These sound waves, undetectable to human ears, can trigger panic attacks, disorientation, and even heart arrhythmias, symptoms eerily resembling the hiker's frantic flight from their tent. Scientists note the pass's unique topography creates a natural wind tunnel with katabatic gusts capable of reaching hurricane speeds. Imagine waking to an invisible force vibrating your organs, your instincts screaming danger without a visible threat. It would explain why experienced climbers sliced through their own shelter, fleeing half-dressed into sub-zero darkness, but infrasound isn't the only natural suspect. In 2020, a team of researchers from EPFL, Zurich and MIT used computer modeling to demonstrate how a rare slab avalanche could have struck the campsite. Not the cascading snow we typically picture, but a compact, icy mass sliding with the force of a freight train. Their simulations showed the tent was pitched on a slope primed for collapse, with layers of wind-hardened snow acting like a ticking time bomb. This aligns with the hiker's injuries, crushed ribs and skull fractures consistent with blunt trauma, not blunt weapons. Even the absence of obvious avalanche debris makes sense. A smaller slab could have dissipated quickly, leaving few traces by morning, yet not all mysteries yield to modern science. The radiation found on some clothing, likely from thorium-laced lantern mantles common in Soviet-era gear. The missing tongues post-mortem scavenging by rodents attracted to soft tissue. But skeptics still highlight gaps no model can bridge. Why were some victims' clothes laced with traces of burning? How did two hivers sustain injuries comparable to a high-speed car crash without external wounds? And perhaps most baffling, why were fragments of a camera recovered? Its final photos showing only darkness, as if whatever they encountered left no visual record. The truth may lie in a horrifying convergence of factors: an avalanche triggering panic, infrasound amplifying disorientation, and hypothermia inducing paradoxical undressing, a phenomenon where freezing victims tear off clothes convinced they're burning up. It's a scenario where nature itself becomes the killer, weaponizing wind, snow, and cold in perfect sequence. But for those who stood at the Dyatlov Pass, feeling the oppressive silence between those peaks, no theory quite shakes the sense that something, or someone, waited in the dark that night. The mountains keep their secrets well, and sometimes the most unsettling answer is that there may be no answer at all. When the Jamison family vanished into the Oklahoma wilderness, they left behind more than just physical clues. They spawned theories so chilling, they blurred the line between crime and the unexplainable. Long before their skeletal remains were discovered, whispers began circulating about forces beyond human comprehension at play in their disappearance. Some locals swore the Kiamichi Mountains hid ancient Native American burial grounds, and crossing into that land uninvited could awaken something best left undisturbed. Others pointed to the family's own odd behavior, Bobby's escalating paranoia, the eerie photos of young Madison staring blankly into the woods, as signs they'd already been marked by something unseen. Then there were the UFO sightings. In the months leading up to their disappearance, multiple witnesses reported strange lights hovering over the mountains, glowing orbs that moved in erratic patterns before vanishing into the night sky. One logger claimed to have seen Bobby's truck stalled on a remote road the evening they vanished, with a pulsating blue light reflected in the windshield. When investigators later reviewed the Jamisons' camera, they found not just those unsettling daytime shots, but grainy nighttime images of the tree line illuminated by an unidentifiable light source far too bright to be a flashlight, yet casting no visible beam. Even seasoned law enforcement weren't immune to the creep factor. The lead detective on the case admitted feeling an overwhelming sense of dread each time he entered the search zone, as if the forest itself resisted scrutiny. One search dog, trained to track human scent, abruptly sat down and howled at a patch of empty ground, refusing to move forward. Another team reported equipment malfunctions, flashlights dying without explanation, GPS devices spinning wildly despite clear skies. Psychologists studying the case note how easily isolation and stress can warp perception, especially in high-stakes investigations. The Jamisons' own paranoia, their belief they were being watched, might have been early signs of a shared psychotic episode where a family's collective delusion becomes their reality. But rational explanations do little to quiet the rumors. Some still insist the family stumbled upon something the mountains wanted kept hidden, whether it was a drug operation, an underground cult, or something far older and darker. What lingers isn't just the mystery of their fate, but the unsettling sense that some places hold secrets that defy logic. The Jameson story serves as a modern cautionary tale, reminding us that even in an age of satellite imaging and digital trails, there are still corners of the map where the rules seem to bend, and vanishings leave behind questions no forensics can answer. For decades, the Beaumont Children case has been a wound that refuses to heal, its unanswered questions festering beneath the surface of Australia's collective memory. Among the countless names floated over the years, one suspect stands out with chilling prominence: Arthur Stanley Brown, a convicted pedophile who died in prison in 2002 without ever facing charges for the Beaumont abductions. Brown's history was a tapestry of violence. He'd already been convicted of murdering 2 other young girls in Queensland in the 1970s, and witnesses placed him in Adelaide around the time Jane, Anna, and Grant vanished. But what made him particularly compelling was his sickening modus operandi. Like the Beaumont abductor, Brown had a habit of grooming children with small acts of kindness before striking, often buying them treats to lower their guard. One witness even recalled seeing a man matching his description at Glenelg Beach that day, his blonde hair slicked back, his eyes tracking the siblings as they played. Yet without DNA or concrete evidence tying him to the crime, authorities could only watch as Brown took his secrets to the grave. Then there's Bevan Spencer von Einem, another monstrous figure lurking in the shadows of this case. A serial killer linked to the brutal murders of at least 5 young men in the 80s, von Einem was known to frequent Adelaide's beaches and had a fixation on children that bordered on obsession. Detectives discovered disturbing diaries in his possession, filled with scribbled notes about blonde angels and perfect families, phrases that echoed witness accounts of the Beaumont's abductor. Even more unsettling, von Einem had ties to a shadowy network of Adelaide's elite, leading to whispers of a larger cover-up. Some investigators believe the Beaumont children may have been victims of a pedophile ring, their disappearance orchestrated by powerful figures who ensured silence through fear. But like so many threads in this case, it remains speculation, tangled in hearsay and the passage of time. The most recent suspect to emerge wasn't a career criminal, but a seemingly ordinary man, Harry Phipps, a wealthy businessman who lived just minutes from Glenelg Beach. His son, Derek, came forward in 2013 with a horrifying claim that as a child, he'd witnessed his father bathing the Beaumont siblings in their home on the day they vanished. According to Derek, Phipps had a hidden basement where he kept trophies from his victims, including a collection of children's clothing. Investigators excavated the property, uncovering bone fragments and a child's sandal, but forensic testing proved inconclusive. Skeptics argued Derek's account was influenced by years of estrangement and his father's abusive legacy, yet the timing of his allegations coinciding with Phipps' death leaves room for doubt. If true, it suggests the killer wasn't a stranger lurking in the dunes, but a neighbor hiding in plain sight. What makes this case so agonizing is the sheer volume of dead ends. Every lead seems to dissolve just as hope flickers to life. Witness testimony degrades over decades, evidence is lost or mishandled, suspects die with their guilt forever unproven. Even the notorious Dear Mummy letter, once a beacon of hope, was dismissed as a hoax after handwriting analysis failed to match Jane's known samples. Yet the Beaumont's legacy persists not just as victims but as catalysts for change. Their disappearance revolutionized child safety laws in Australia, ushering in an era where kids no longer roamed unsupervised. But for a family left with 3 empty beds and a lifetime of unanswered questions, progress offers little solace. The truth, it seems, is buried somewhere between the grains of Glenelg's sand, waiting, perhaps, for a storm to finally wash it ashore. The lead Masks case isn't just a mystery, it's a conduit to the shadowy world where science, the occult, and Cold War paranoia collide. Miguel and Manuel weren't just electronics technicians, they were men who moved in circles where the lines between experimentation and esotericism blurred. Among the most persistent theories is their alleged involvement with secretive occult groups, particularly those dabbling in astral projection or interdimensional contact. The lead masks, far from crude props, may have been meticulously crafted for a purpose, to shield their faces from otherworldly energies during a ritual gone wrong. Occult scholars point to early 20th century European texts describing lead as a spiritual insulator, believed to protect against entity attachment during metaphysical journeys. Could the men have been attempting to peer beyond the veil only to encounter something they couldn't survive? The notes left behind only deepen the intrigue. Phrases like "swallow the capsules" and "after the effect is proven" suggest a chillingly methodical approach, as if they were following instructions from a playbook outsiders couldn't fathom. Some researchers trace the language to obscure Brazilian spiritualist movements of the 1950s, where psychedelics were combined with ceremonial magic to induce transcendent states. The mention of protection masks aligns with accounts from defectors of these groups, who described initiates wearing metal visors during rituals to filter harmful vibrations. Yet no known sect has ever claimed the men as members, leaving their spiritual affiliations, if any, forever speculative. Then there's the darker thread tying them to clandestine scientific experiments. Post-war Brazil was a hotbed of military and corporate testing, with rumored programs exploring mind control and sensory deprivation. The men's expertise in electronics would have made them valuable to such projects, and their odd behavior in the days before their deaths, telling neighbors they were on the brink of a great discovery, hints at participation in something covert. The presence of dimethyl sulfoxide, a compound later used in CIA experiments like MK-Ultra, on their clothing fuels speculation they were exposed to experimental chemicals. Even the radioactivity rumors take on new weight when considering Brazil's nuclear ambitions during this era. Were they handling materials they didn't fully understand? But the most haunting possibility is that their deaths were neither accident nor suicide, but sacrifice. Vintame Park's isolation and the men's posed bodies evoke ceremonial killing practices found in certain Afro-Brazilian traditions, where offerings were made to deities in exchange for knowledge. The lead masks might not have been protection for them, but rather containment, a way to ensure whatever they summoned didn't escape. Local legends speak of a cult operating in Nitroy's hills during that time, one that allegedly sought to bridge the material and spiritual planes. No police reports corroborate this, but in a case where every lead dissolves like mist, myth becomes its own kind of evidence. What lingers isn't just the unanswered how, but the why. Two men walked into those woods with a plan, convinced their actions would lead to revelation. Instead, they became a warning, one written in symbols we're still struggling to decipher. Their masks remain blank and impenetrable, hiding even now the truth of what they hoped to find, or worse, what found them. Whoever hijacked Chicago's airwaves that night in 1987 didn't just interrupt a broadcast, they pulled off a feat that should have been technically impossible without insider knowledge. Taking over a television signal requires more than just ambition. It demands an intimate understanding of transmitter frequencies, signal strengths, and the precise vulnerabilities of analog equipment. In the pre-digital era, this wasn't something you could Google. The intruder needed engineering-level expertise, someone who'd worked with broadcast hardware or served as a ham radio operator capable of overpowering a station's signal with a portable transmitter. Rumors persist that the culprit was a disgruntled former employee of Chicago's PBS affiliate WTTW, or perhaps an electronics whiz from a local college's engineering program. One tantalizing lead points to a group of Northwestern University students who'd bragged about experimenting with broadcast piracy around the same time. though no evidence ever surfaced to confirm their involvement. The hijacker's choice of disguise adds another layer of intrigue. The Max Headroom character wasn't just a pop culture reference, it was a deliberate middle finger to mainstream media. Headroom, a glitchy, AI-generated TV host, symbolized the chaos of technology gone rogue, a perfect avatar for someone mocking the system's fragility. The costume itself was telling, a rubber mask with exaggerated features, easy to recognize but impossible to trace. The jerky, distorted voice, likely achieved with a cheap vocoder, the kind used by amateur radio enthusiasts. Every detail felt calculated to confuse rather than conceal, as if the hacker wanted credit for the prank without the consequences. But why weren't they caught? The answer might lie in the era itself. Without today's digital footprints, tracking a rogue signal was like chasing smoke. The hijacker likely operated from a moving vehicle or a rooftop with line of sight to the WTTW transmitter, vanishing before authorities could triangulate the source. Chicago's FCC office was notoriously understaffed at the time, and the sheer absurdity of the stunt may have delayed a serious response. By the time investigators treated it as more than a joke, the trail had gone cold. The most compelling clue emerged decades later in an online forum post from someone claiming to be one of two accomplices. According to the anonymous confession, the duo were electronics hobbyists inspired by legendary phone freakers like John Draper. They'd allegedly pulled off the stunt as a dare, never expecting it to become folklore. The post included technical details only an insider would know, like the exact frequency used to override WTTW signal. But without verifiable proof, it remains just another layer of the myth. What makes the Max Headroom incident unforgettable isn't just the mystery of the hacker's identity, but what it revealed about the fragility of our media landscape. This wasn't a cyber attack demanding sophisticated coding. It was an analog-era wake-up call, proving that with the right knowledge and a little audacity, even the airwaves weren't safe. And somewhere out there, the culprit might still be laughing, their secret tucked away like a static-filled whisper in the noise of history. The phrase Tamam Shud wasn't just a cryptic note, it was a linguistic fingerprint, one that sent investigators spiraling down a maze of Cold War intrigue and international secrets. The scrap of paper torn from the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam pointed not just to the man's possible origins, but to a world where identities were as fluid as the ink on a forged passport. The book itself was a rare edition, translated into Persian, a detail that immediately cast suspicion on ties to the Middle East or Soviet-aligned regions. But the man's features, fair skin, reddish-blonde hair, clashed with that theory, suggesting he might have been a European operative immersed in Eastern languages. His teeth told another story, dental work unlike anything commonly found in Australia, with unusual gold fillings and techniques more consistent with American or British practices from the 1930s. This wasn't just a man without a name, he was a patchwork of contradictions, each clue pulling investigators in a different direction. Espionage quickly emerged as the most compelling explanation. The late 1940s were a pressure cooker of global tension, and Australia, with its strategic ports and British ties, was a hotbed of spy activity. The code scribbled in the book's margins, a jumble of letters resembling nothing so much as a one-time cipher, mirrored techniques used by intelligence networks to relay covert messages. Even the man's physique hinted at a life of training. His oddly splayed toes suggested years in military boots, while his toned calves aligned with reports of Soviet agents who'd trained as long-distance runners to evade capture. Then there was the nurse, the woman who'd received her own copy of the Rubaiyat from a stranger months earlier. Her sudden silence when shown the dead man's face spoke volumes. Was she a handler, a fellow operative, or just another piece in a puzzle too vast to assemble? But the most haunting theory isn't about who the Tamam Shud man was, but what he represented. Some researchers believe he was a lost spy, cut loose by his handlers after a botched mission and left to die with nothing but a poetic epitaph. Others argue the code wasn't a message at all, but a psychological weapon, a red herring meant to send investigators chasing shadows while the real operation vanished into the fog. The truth, much like the man himself, remains just out of reach, suspended between fact and folklore. His face, preserved in death masks and grainy photographs, stares back at us across the decades, a silent witness to secrets he took to the grave. The Circleville Letters didn't just threaten, they knew. Whoever penned those venomous notes possessed an unsettling familiarity with their targets' private lives, suggesting motives far more personal than random malice. At first glance, the letters seemed to stem from petty grudges, accusing neighbors of affairs or corruption with the vindictiveness of a small-town gossip. But the precision of the accusations hinted at something darker, an intimate knowledge of secret debts, hidden relationships, even conversations held behind closed doors. This wasn't just harassment, it was psychological warfare waged by someone who'd been watching, waiting, and collecting ammunition for years. One prevailing theory points to a twisted sense of vigilante justice. The writer often framed their threats as moral corrections, condemning perceived infidelities or dishonesty with self-righteous fury. Some victims recalled fleeting encounters with a figure who'd later reference those interactions in letters, implying the writer saw themselves as a punisher of sins. The most chilling example, a note sent to Mary Gillespie's daughter warning her to tell your mother to stop her whoring, followed by details no stranger could have known, the color of her bedroom curtains, the time she typically arrived home from work. It was as if the writer had crafted their own warped morality play, casting themselves as judge and executioner. Then there's the political angle. Circleville in the late 70s was a tinderbox of local tensions, with feuds between law enforcement, school officials, and powerful families simmering beneath the surface. The letters frequently targeted figures connected to the school board, including Judge Paul Fresher, whose conviction later raised eyebrows. Fresher maintained his innocence, and supporters speculated he'd been framed to discredit his rulings on controversial cases. The timing fed conspiracy theories. Letters continued post-conviction, including one mailed to a newspaper that sneered, "The law won't stop me." Was this a smear campaign disguised as madness? A shadowy effort to manipulate local power structures. Without a confession, the truth remains buried under layers of small-town politics. Violence wasn't confined to paper. Ron Gillespie's death ruled a suicide despite glaring inconsistencies, suggests the writer escalated from intimidation to physical harm. The crime scene defied logic. Ron's gun lacked fingerprints, the bullet's trajectory didn't match self-infliction, and a witness reported seeing a second car speeding away moments after the shot. Years later, a retired deputy admitted off record that evidence had been overlooked, fueling suspicions of a cover-up to protect someone influential. The discovery of a buried cache containing a gun and mask in '94 only deepened the unease, implying the writer had trophies and possibly accomplices. What makes the Circleville case so unnerving is the duality of its perpetrator. They were both omnipresent and invisible, wielding secrets like a weapon while hiding behind the anonymity of blocked letters and payphone calls. Whether driven by personal vendetta, political scheming, or sheer sadism, their legacy endures as a warning. Sometimes the most dangerous threats don't come from outsiders, but from the person who's been standing in plain sight all along. Brian Schaffer's vanishing act defies logic in every way. How does a healthy, ambitious medical student step into a crowded bar and never step out? The Ugly Tuna Saloona wasn't some sprawling maze. It was a single-story venue with limited exits, all monitored by cameras. Yet not a single frame captures Brian leaving. This glaring absence fuels theories as contradictory as they are compelling. Could he have slipped out undetected, perhaps through an unmonitored service entrance or kitchen door? Some investigators speculate he might have exited during a shift change when staff traffic could obscure his movements. But even if he did, where would he go? His apartment keys, phone, and wallet were all left behind, ruling out a spontaneous escape. His bank accounts never saw another transaction. His passport gathered dust at home. This wasn't the behavior of someone starting fresh, it was the signature of someone who never made it out alive. Then there's the possibility of voluntary disappearance, a theory that crumbles under scrutiny. Brian had everything to lose. He was weeks away from a dream vacation with his girlfriend. His medical career was accelerating, and friends described him as upbeat and engaged. No red flags hinted at depression or secret turmoil. Even the strained relationship with his father, who'd recently died in a freak accident, doesn't fully explain vanishing without a trace. If he'd planned to disappear, why leave behind essentials? Why no digital breadcrumbs, no emails, no social media activity, no whispers to confidants? The idea of a meticulously orchestrated it doesn't align with the chaotic reality of his last known moments laughing with friends, making plans for the next day. Foul play theories loom larger, tangled in eerie details. Brian's cell phone pinged once days later near campus, a blip that suggests someone might have powered it on before discarding it. The timing aligns with witness reports of a suspicious figure lingering near the bar that night, a man described as overly interested in Brian's group. Then there's the cryptic behavior of Brian's closest friend, Clint Florence, who lawyered up immediately and reportedly failed a polygraph. While inconclusive, these inconsistencies nag at investigators. Even the bar's staff came under scrutiny. One employee abruptly quit days after the disappearance, though no concrete links were ever proven. The most chilling theory: that Brian never left the building at all. Construction was underway adjacent to the ugly tuna, and some speculate he could have fallen into an open shaft or been buried under debris. When the site was later paved over without thorough inspection, it sealed off any chance of discovery. Others whisper about an altercation inside the bar, a drunk patron, a bouncer's overreaction that escalated fatally, with his body hidden in a dumpster or storage area. But without evidence, these remain dark whispers in a case starved for light. What makes Brian's disappearance so uniquely frustrating is its proximity to answers. Most cold cases suffer from time's erosion, faded memories, lost evidence. Here, the clues were fresh, the footage intact, the timeline crisp, yet every lead dead ends in paradox. The cameras saw him enter but not exit. His phone signaled life but left no trail. His friends remember his laughter but not his goodbye. After nearly 2 decades, the ugly tuna's walls hold the only record of his final hours, and they refuse to speak. From the Sodder Children's vanishing act, where not a single bone was found despite a fire hot enough to melt steel, to the Isdal Woman's erased identity, with every label cut from her clothes and her teeth filed down to obscure nationality, each case holds a moment so bizarre it redefines what we consider possible. The Black Dahlia's killer didn't just murder, they bisected Elizabeth Short's body with surgical precision, then posed her like a macabre mannequin, her lips sliced into a grotesque Glasgow grin, as if frozen in a scream. In Villisca, the axe murderer covered victims' faces with blankets after bludgeoning them, a chilling gesture of mock mercy, then leaned the weapon against the wall like a macabre trophy. The Zodiac Killer's taunts weren't just letters, they were cryptographic puzzles mailed to newspapers, one containing a cipher that took 51 years to crack, only to reveal a rant about slaves in paradise. The Jameson family's truck was found idling on a remote road, their purses lined up neatly inside, but the real head-scratcher, the photos on their camera showing their young daughter standing stiffly in the woods at night, her expression blank as if someone or something had positioned her there. And who could forget the lead Max case, 2 electronics technicians dead on a hillside, their faces shielded by homemade lead visors, clutching notes instructing them to swallow the capsules at a precise time. Even the Springfield Three's disappearance defies logic. 3 women vanished from a home where coffee was still warm, cigarettes burned down in ashtrays, and a single voicemail whispered, "We're gonna kill," before cutting out. The Dyatlov Pass hikers fled their tent into sub-zero darkness, some barefoot, only to be found with injuries matching the force of a car crash, yet no signs of struggle. And the Somerton man, his corpse bore a scrap of paper reading Tamam Shud, "It is finished," torn from a book whose margins held an unbreakable code. The Beaumont children's abduction plays out like a horror film. A stranger buys them pasties, plays with them for hours, then walks them hand in hand to a car as witnesses watch unalarmed. The Circleville letter writer terrorized a town for decades, knowing secrets no outsider should, while Brian Schaffer stepped into a bar's surveillance blind spot and literally ceased to exist. And Max Headroom's TV hijacking, a masked figure spanked on live air, giggling through a distorted voice before vanishing into static, never caught, never explained. Each twist lingers like a shadow you can't shake, forcing us to question not just what happened, but whether some truths are simply too strange to ever fully comprehend. The evidence taunts, the theories multiply, but one thing remains. In these cases, reality outstrips even our darkest imagination. These cases aren't just unsolved crimes, they're open wounds in the fabric of history, each one tugging at our collective curiosity with the same relentless pull. Whether it's the Sodder Children's disappearance, where fire refused to leave even a trace of bone, or the Zodiac's taunting ciphers that still dare us to decode them, these mysteries defy the passage of time. They linger because they challenge our most basic assumptions about justice, about logic, even about human nature itself. How can entire families vanish without a whisper? How can killers leave behind clues that feel like they're mocking us from the shadows? It's the gap between what we know and what we should know that keeps us coming back, rewinding the tape, searching for the detail everyone else missed. There's something primal in our fascination, the same instinct that makes us pause at a roadside memorial or lean closer when a neighbor whispers gossip. These stories aren't just about the victims or the perpetrators, they're about us. They force us to confront how little control we really have, how thin the line is between order and chaos. The Springfield Three's house, frozen mid-breakfast with purses waiting by the door, could have been any of ours. The Jamesons' eerie photos feel like something we might have snapped on a family hike, never imagining they'd become evidence. That relatability is what transforms these cases from headlines into legends. They don't just haunt the families, they haunt everyone who hears them. And perhaps that's why we can't let go, because solving them would mean restoring order to a world that so often feels random. When we speculate about the Black Dahlia's killer or trace the Dyatlov Pass hiker's final steps, we're not just playing detective, we're trying to stitch the universe back into something that makes sense. Even when science gives us answers, like putting a name to the boy in the box, the deeper questions remain. Who hurt him? Why did no one speak up? The truth might explain the facts, but it doesn't always soothe the unease. So what do you think happened? Was the Somerton man a discarded spy, or a heartbroken lover leaving behind a poetic goodbye? Did the Circleville writer watch from the crowd as their letters tore a town apart? The conversation doesn't end here. It's alive in every theory, every Reddit thread, every documentary that dares to ask one more question. If you've got a hunch, drop it in the comments. Sometimes the freshest eyes spot what decades of scrutiny have overlooked. And if you're hungry for more deep dives into the unexplained, hit subscribe. The world's full of stories that don't fit neatly into endings, and we're just getting started. After all, the most enduring mysteries aren't just about the past, they're about how long we're willing to keep looking.